Hello and welcome to Policy Exchange. My name's Benedict McAleenan and I lead the Energy and Environment Unit here at Policy Exchange, and I'm delighted to be chairing this afternoon's debate about the future of the North Sea. Today's event is part of a project of the same name, looking at the role of the North Sea in delivering two stated priorities of Boris Johnson's government, levelling up the UK's economy and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. For hundreds of years, the North Sea has acted as a highway of trade, a valuable fishing resource, and latterly as a source of energy security through the oil and gas sector. Now it faces a radically different and potentially lucrative future as a hub for low-carbon industries. Our work has set out policies to ensure that industries and communities along the UK's North Sea coastline can reinvigorate their economies and lead the charge against climate change through net zero industries such as wind, hydrogen, and carbon capture and storage. We also looked at how those communities can best capture the economic benefits of such developments. You can find our report on the topic, which was generously supported by National Grid, on our website at policyexchange.org.uk. Since that report was published, the Prime Minister has launched his 10-point plan for green industrial strategy, with a heavy emphasis on jobs connected to the North Sea. The government has announced plans for a North Sea transition deal, and free ports have been announced for the Thames to the Tees. Just yesterday, GE announced plans for a new factory with hundreds of jobs in Teesside to supply the Dogger Bank wind farm. That last point will be music to the ears of all of our guest speakers today, each of whom represents a different part of the puzzle in helping North Sea communities to deliver on this opportunity. I'm delighted to welcome the Right Honourable Anne-Marie Trevelyan MP, who's the Minister of State for Energy and Clean Growth, and also a Member of Parliament for a North Sea constituency. Ben Houchen, member of Tees Valley, which will be hosting that new GE factory. Melanie Onn, who is Deputy Chief Executive of the Wind Industries Trade Association, RenewableUK, and also a former Labour MP for Great Grimsby in Humberside. And Nicola Shaw CBE, who is Executive Director of National Grid and runs the group's UK business. We're going to turn to each of our speakers for some opening remarks, but before I do, I'd like to invite those of you who tuned into our Zoom event to let us know if you have any questions by using the raise hand function, which you can find by clicking on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. Minister, if I could turn to you first, how's the government planning to support the transformation of the North Sea?
Benedict, thank you. I'm really delighted to be able to be with you all today to discuss the recommendations that you've made in your Policy Exchange Future of the North Sea report. I think it's safe to say that COVID-19 has presented us with some really unique challenges, but it's also an opportunity to grow back greener and more sustainably. That recovery must be clean and it must be resilient to make our economy match fit for tomorrow's challenges. As you mentioned, the announcements which were made in our 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution in November, and then the Energy White Paper, which we published in December, provide a very clear signal to developers, to investors, and indeed to the broader supply chain that the UK intends to lead the way in supporting and deploying low-carbon technologies. Your report rightly acknowledges opportunities for the oil and gas sector to support the energy transition. It is, of course, important to emphasise the ongoing importance of the sector as it stands today to ensure that we maintain the skills and the companies with the capability to support a managed energy transition, both economically in terms of jobs and revenues, but also in terms of our energy security. Although, as the report points out, the sector has experienced ongoing decline and its role will diminish in its present form in the coming years, we will continue to be reliant on oil and gas for our domestic needs, and it's vital that the communities on the UK's East Coast are helped to achieve the transition rather than face a cliff edge in the coming years. You will have seen this morning's announcements of government support to bring forward major new offshore wind manufacturing hubs on Teesside and Humber, as well as GE's plan to make a significant investment, as you mentioned, in a state-of-the-art blade manufacturing facility at the Teesside site. And these underline our commitment both to our transition to net zero and to ensuring that the economic benefits of the green revolution are shared by our communities up and down the UK. The UK's offshore oil and gas assets have the potential to be reused and repurposed for CCUS projects, and our initial review has helped to identify those opportunities. We will be working with industry and regulators to provide clarity on the regulations for repurposing assets and to develop technical guidance on how this can be done both safely and securely. Your report also notes space in the North Sea is an increasingly sought after commodity. Our offshore transmission review is considering how we will deliver increased coordination of offshore electricity networks, realising potential benefits as soon as possible, whilst maintaining the rapid delivery that we need to deliver the 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, which is point 1 of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan. Coordination can benefit offshore wind and wider sectors by helping us to make the most efficient use of new offshore infrastructure and the interactions between them. I'm really looking forward to discussing with all of you this afternoon how government can work with business to deliver on these priorities and many others. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to turn to Ben Houchen.
Thanks, Benedict, and thank you to PX for inviting me along to another talk. It's very kind and very well timed. It's as if you knew what was going to happen before we even knew it was going to happen. But leading on from the words of the Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan of what the government are trying to do in this policy space, I can now honestly say, certainly after this morning and last night's announcement, that Teesside and in particular Teesworks is the plan in action. We can demonstrate very specifically offshore wind manufacturers in GE Renewables building their new state-of-the-art blade factory on the Teesworks site. That will hopefully be one of many, 650,000 square feet, 750 direct jobs, and GE are predicting another 1,500 jobs in the local supply chain with either existing suppliers or the relocation of suppliers into the region. They actually have some options over future factories on the basis that they might win some future CFD rounds. So it also goes to show that there's still a lot of work to do to completely solidify the UK manufacturing supply chain in the UK rather than importing product from the rest of the world, which I know is a key tenet of the Prime Minister's plan. So offshore wind is absolutely key to what we're going to do. The CCUS that we've touched upon as well in the North Sea, I think, is going to play a really key role in the transition away from oil and gas. Obviously, the depleted oil fields will be a huge asset to be able to fill with carbon that we can pump from places like Net Zero Teesside on Teesside, and obviously from the Humber as well, which for the more geeky amongst us, we'll see that there is now a joint proposal between the Humber and Teesside, with the transport and storage element having been a joint proposal, which makes the whole thing much, much more powerful. And that all ultimately blends together with the fantastic opportunities in hydrogen that can come from both CCUS and offshore wind, which is something that Teesside has done already for a lot of years now, producing more than 50% of all of the hydrogen in the UK. But all of this is actually about helping largely post-industrial areas, not just in Teesside, but in the Humber and the Northwest as well. Areas that have the expertise that we're going to need to build ourselves out of the pandemic, but also to build back greener, as Anne-Marie has rightly said, because they're chemical processing engineering jobs that are very similar to those we have in the current oil and gas sector and in the chemical and processing sector. They're going to help deliver CCUS, offshore wind and hydrogen to its fullest potential. And the thing that we can't shy away from, as you, I think, said in your opening remarks, Benedict, which is where I will end my opening remarks, is the announcement that came last week, that I think last week was even understated, on the government announcing free ports across the United Kingdom. I mean, I got very excited last week after they were announced, and it wasn't just because we got one, but it's because we knew by getting a free port what it would actually mean. And I can sit here and say that the reason that GE were able to announce late last night and first thing this morning is because we had a deal in place with them that was subject to us getting a free port, because that makes us more internationally competitive. It means that the likes of GE, who may have chosen to stay in mainland Europe, potentially in their factory in Cherbourg, it now makes it a financially viable alternative to relocate to the UK. So all of these things come together in really defining what I think levelling up is about. It's building back greener, it's creating good quality manufacturing jobs in areas that need them, particularly in the north of England. And it's creating the UK as a world-leading, innovative country in the likes of offshore wind, renewables and CCUS.
Thanks, Ben. Nicola Shaw from National Grid.
Thanks. Well, I absolutely agree with Ben. And I think it builds on that really quite important report you did. I think that so positive, so optimistic about the future for this area. And I think that's absolutely right. First, jobs and growth. 40,000 jobs in your estimation for this area, with 20 billion add to the gross value add, which is fantastic. And I think is a good example of what the green economy can do for us. It is important that we support young people, and we find ways too of retraining those or using the skills of those who are working in existing carbon industries. And I think that's a real opportunity for all of us. National Grid, we've done some work. We think it's probably 400,000 jobs in the energy sector more generally out to 2050 to deliver net zero. So there are real opportunities. 120,000 of those come in the next 10 years. And that all builds exactly from the work that you did, the work that the government has done. And I think that is my next point, which is we have to keep this energy up, because I think it will help us on the world stage. It absolutely, we have shown that we can lead in net zero, and we're continuing to do so. In the last even 5 years, what a transformation from having coal being about 25% of our generation to now a very small proportion. It's made a massive difference and shown how we can lead, and all of the things we've been announcing recently just reinforce that. Keeping the pace up all through this year, though, and leading into COP26, I think is vital. So these announcements are great, but then there's more, as the Minister said, on developing policy further so that we can keep going. And then my final point is, like everyone else, is about the communities and making sure that we make sure that people feel that net zero is with them, not against them. And I think that there's quite a lot to do in that space, perhaps building on your ideas of marine plans for onshore. I'm particularly aware that bringing in more and more electricity from offshore from the North Sea, we've got to find ways of minimising the impact onshore, because we have to take that electricity from the sea to where people live and work and where they need to use it. We need to make sure that that is as minimising in its intrusion as possible, and again, that the jobs are in the right place. So your planning point, I think, is very well made. So I look forward to further discussions.
Thank you, Nicola. And finally to Melanie Onn from RenewableUK. Thank
you, Benedict. There seems to be a rash of everybody agreeing with everybody else, and I echo the comments that have already been made. And I suppose I would just add a couple of points to say, we know that the Climate Change Committee recommends between 95 and 125 gigawatts of wind energy coming by 2050 to help us achieve that net zero figure. And although onshore will play a role in that, the majority of it is going to come from offshore wind. We've seen some of the pipeline, the announcement today around GE, which is fantastic news, demonstrates how much of that activity is going to be taking place around the East Coast. And we're going to see about 39 gigawatts of fixed bottom offshore wind and around 12 gigawatts of floating wind in the North Sea. And that does cause some challenges as well as bringing some opportunities. And we've touched on some of that. With all of that offshore, the interconnectors, it's going to be something like 18 gigawatts of interconnectors are going to be required by 2030 to make sure that we get the full potential of that offshore wind. And I'm really pleased to hear, and we shouldn't underestimate the value of the review that is already underway on transmission connections and minimising the impact on communities. I see it as a tripartite review, really: government and government agencies, parliamentarians, and the industry all working together, not only to overcome the technological challenges, which are great, but also the time frame, which we know is of particular importance. Additionally, I would also say that we shouldn't forget the fact that the Crown Estate have got a huge part to play in the development of offshore wind. They are responsible for all of the seabed leasing, and they have actually brought together around some of the challenges particularly around nature and co-location of that spatial usage, recognising that the North Sea is getting increasingly busy, have brought together under the umbrella of the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change Programme, people from industry, people from the environmental sector, marine management organisations, Coast Guards associations, all together to try and identify the key issues that will impact on all of those areas of concern, but try to come up with solutions in terms of prioritising which ones are most important to ensure that we tackle whether it is about marine bird life or wildlife, but also make sure that we hit that target of 40 gigawatts by 2030, which is absolutely essential in terms of delivering on all of the community aspects as well. We're talking about at least 27,000 jobs in offshore wind directly by 2030, potentially another 17,000 in floating offshore wind. So the benefits for communities are absolutely huge. A lot of that will only happen if we overcome the barriers, but recognise that the opportunities that come with it are massive and will have huge impacts on local communities in terms of jobs and manufacturing and export opportunities too.
Thanks very much, Melanie. I'm going to turn in a moment to our audience questions, but before we do, I just want to plug our report one more time. You can find the report at policyexchange.org.uk. It covers a number of these issues that have been raised today in the opening remarks. One of the issues in particular that we wanted to highlight was about the social investment that's also required in attracting and retaining a skilled workforce within many of the coastal communities that service the North Sea industries. I want to ask several of the panelists what you think is needed in terms of better housing, in terms of better skills training, in terms of investing in the culture and attractiveness of these areas in order to support those workforces. I'm going to turn first of all to Ben Houchen.
Thanks, Benedict. I mean, it's been really interesting in recent times because when you're trying to attract, in particular, these large investors, you often think about the very black and white, hard-nosed things about energy costs, land availability, labour costs, etc. And you often think as a secondary point that a lot of these very senior executives are going to have to relocate to that area. We've also had a very interesting conversation over the recent months with some Treasury officials where we had to convince them of the same to try and get them to come to Teesside rather than elsewhere. And it is a big part of it. So you can't always look at these things just in the narrow view of the investment. You've then got to actually sell the region. And that means actually in a lot of post-industrial areas, they've been held back, they've been downtrodden for a long, long time now. And it takes a lot for the community to believe in itself again. So a lot of this is self-fulfilling. So once you start to get these investments, people start to pick up, they gain confidence, they speak more positively about themselves. And I think, human nature is that people want to be associated with positive things. They become more positive themselves, and it makes a massive difference. So it's absolutely vital. I also think I can't remember the second part of the question, Benedict. But when it came to the skills part, we are in a very fortunate position. It's also not just about geographical location of our proximity to the North Sea. But it's also, secondly, about we are very fortunate, and maybe it is because of that geography that the types of technologies are based where they are, but the existing workforce is largely skilled in this sector anyway. I mean, you can already see in the last 10 years, the transition away from oil and gas into things like offshore wind. The number of workers who have transitioned across are largely skilled to do the work with some upskilling. And one of the things that we had to do to attract GE, because they're not just talking about the 750 direct employees, they're very concerned about the indirect employees within the region as well. We had to establish something called the TeesWorks Academy, where now, after today's announcement, we will be sitting with them and designing bespoke courses that will be run through the local colleges, local universities and private sector providers to make sure that when that factory is open in January 2023, that they've got a ready-made workforce. And the fact that they're willing to do that in partnership with us is really powerful, because the other part of this is, especially in areas like Teesside, and I'm sure it's the same across the north of England, is what you can't do is you can't import that labour. And I'm not talking about from abroad, I'm talking about from other parts of the UK. And what we can't do is see areas of relatively high unemployment and deprivation where they are sat 50 yards away from a brand new factory and they can't understand why they haven't been given that opportunity. So it's not just about the investment. The next bit, actually, I think is the hardest bit, making sure that those local people are trained and have the opportunity to get the jobs that are being created. And that's something we think we're getting our heads around, but I think that's actually the most difficult part of the jigsaw.
Anne-Marie Trevelyan, the most difficult part of the jigsaw. How's government working to solve this?
So I think Ben makes a critical point, which is about confidence. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've got as government, is to make sure that the investments we're making and the coherence we're bringing to the whole net zero challenge is understood and is believed. And as we make those investments, and we've seen today in the Humber and on Teesside with GE, it genuinely brings a renewed sense of confidence that those areas that have been left behind for a long time as post-industrial areas are actually being considered, believed, and indeed investing. So we've set up the Green Jobs Task Force because we're acutely aware that across these areas, not only is there a lot of reskilling that needs to be done, but there is a whole next generation of skilled young men and women who are going to be required throughout the portfolio of roles that will be needed to help deliver net zero, from heating engineers to the car mechanic who has to become a software engineer, through to those who are already working in the heavy industry sectors to be able to move. So we are investing a lot of time, and BEIS are working kind of very hand in glove with DFE and indeed with DWP to really make sure that we understand with industry and with the local communities who will be supporting this training what it is we need to help get set up so that we've got that pipeline coming through for the foreseeable future.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to our first audience question, which is coming from Natalie Thomas. Natalie. Sorry, one thing I should add is, please could you give your name and your organisation, please? Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hello, it's Natalie Thomas, the energy correspondent at the Financial Times. There have been waves of optimism before around how many jobs the offshore wind industry could create in Britain, and yet they haven't quite materialised in the number some previous government ministers have envisaged. I'm thinking specifically of Gordon Brown as saying in 2010 that 70,000 jobs would be created in the offshore wind industry by 2020 in the UK. What gives you confidence that this time will be different, that we won't, in a few years' time, see more tales of woe like the administration of BIFAB in Scotland, for example?
Nicola, would you like to take that?
I'm very happy to say two things. The first is we've done some work looking at what would attract young people into the sector. And they've absolutely said that working in a job that helps with climate change is something that gives them a real sense of positivity. And I think that gives us, building on Ben's point about how can we get people wanting to be trained in this space, I think that's a really good opportunity, both for men and women. It covers both genders. Second thing, Natalie, I'd say is these plans look really real. What we've seen is people bidding for the rights to build the wind farms. We've got the technology available now. We've seen a lot of progress in the price coming down. So all it requires now is the coordination and the working together to make it effective. So it's not like this is new technology anymore. This is technology we know and understand. And so I think it is that these plans are pretty robust. The challenge is getting it all done in time and making sure that we do it in a way that brings the communities with us rather than the risk that it won't be done, I think.
Melanie.
Thank you. I think that there are three things really. So first of all, policy is now in the right place. We might have had some hiccups and some delays, but there is absolutely no uncertainty now around the direction of travel when it comes to the renewables sector and support for the renewables sector. We've seen some real investment, which we haven't seen in such high levels and such determined amounts, which is really, really welcome. And some of the issues that industry have raised as being barriers previously have now been overcome. So, if we were to ask a company like GE, perhaps, why won't you build in the UK? Well, they will say, actually, it's too expensive to build in the UK. We can expand what we've got on the continent. But now with the policy changes that have come and the support from the regions as well as from government, means that they are prepared to take that risk because the actual risk has been minimised through the actions of government, which is really important. I think what we also need to do is identify some of the gaps where we know there is going to be significant growth. When Ben was talking about the wider supply chain and what we're going to need, the additional 1,500 jobs around GE, and I would say identifying areas like cabling, which is only going to grow, and deciding whether or not we're going to support those businesses to continue to grow to backfill some of those jobs and those opportunities, or allow them to re-establish themselves elsewhere in the UK is the key. I think that there's also a role to play on the part of the industry in terms of opening itself up and making sure that people are aware of the opportunities and how they actually take their journey into the offshore wind or the broader renewables sector, and the opportunities that come and where they can progress. Because at the moment, I think as much effort has been put in, it's still a little bit opaque for people.
Thank you. And finally to you, Minister.
Thank you. Natalie, I think Melanie crystallises it well. I think the challenge was to have a whole of government commitment to net zero. Perhaps Gordon Brown was a man ahead of his time in his vision for what wants to look like, but government has to be aligned for this to work, because the reason for offshore wind is to change how we use our energy. For that we need the wholesale changes from the way we live our lives in our houses, to the cars we drive, to the hydrogen buses that we might get onto, and so on and so on. So it requires a whole of government approach to it, and I think we genuinely are there now. The Energy White Paper and the 10-point plan set out the direction of travel, and now this is a very busy year in BEIS in terms of turning each of those parts of the puzzle into very clear strategic frameworks and business models that each part of the net zero businesses and sectors can work with. So I think I imagine the 70,000 jobs is will be a drop in the ocean to where we will end up. But Gordon Brown wasn't wrong that was the direction of travel in offshore wind. I think we're now seeing it move at a pace that I would hope he would be pleased with too. But it does require a whole of government effort to drive this forwards.
Thank you. And finally, turning to Ben Houchen.
Yeah, just very quickly, I think the answer is really simple and quite straightforward. I think it's honest. I think we can honestly say that this government under Boris Johnson have got really, really serious about this. And the thing that's changed, and everybody's kind of said it, but I think to be really clear about it, is that now the future CFD auctions that we will be run for future contracts for the North Sea actually have some real teeth. Some of the previous CFD auctions talked about UK content, they talked about wanting to have UK manufacturers, but there was no real way of UK government enforcing that. There was lots of words and lots of policy to say they wanted to happen, and that goes back to Gordon Brown's days, but there was no incentive and there was no intervention from the government to make it happen. If you look now, I can tell you the amount of pressure that that Number 10 and that BEIS have put on a number of offshore wind manufacturers to come to the UK rather than stay abroad is very real. And then with the publication of the updated CFD auction, those manufacturers have realised if they're not in the UK, it's going to be very, very difficult to win these contracts. And let's not forget, the UK is going to be producing the largest offshore wind farms for many, many years to come. So if they want to play, they've got to pay and be in the UK.
Thanks very much. To the next questioner, who is Olivia Thomas. Olivia.
Good afternoon, panelists, and Benedict, thank you. My name is Olivia Thomas and I head up the marine planning team at the Crown Estate, so inevitably have a planning-based question. So referenced one and some of the great examples of programmes and initiatives we're seeing coming forward, such as the Offshore Wind Evidence and Change programme, in addressing the recognised need to improve and gain consensus around requirements for change and the associated evidence base. And we've seen action through the Offshore Transmission Network Review as well in terms of addressing strategic grids. But in looking at the future for the North Sea, clearly there are multiple competing pressures, whether that's sectoral technologies and with the environment and other users. I'd like to ask whether the panel will comment on whether they believe trade-offs are required in taking those decisions, and if spatial specificity in planning is the answer. Thank you.
Nicola, this covers an area which regards a lot of affects a lot of national grids infrastructure and interests. So, what are your thoughts?
So I think planning could give us some real benefits. First, I think there are opportunities for combining interconnectors and wind farms. We talk about them as multi-purpose interconnectors, so that you don't need multiple landing sites and fewer cables around the sea. There's a bit of thought to go into that, and I think that will mostly apply to issues post-2030. Issues pre-2030, I think, are much more onshore issues. We need to think quite hard about how we work with communities to make sure that where we come onshore and how we access into the rest of the grid is as least intrusive as possible, and make sure that the balance between communities with the jobs and the benefits that come with the cleaner power are achieved. So one of the things I am particularly thinking about is how do we get some of those benefits to those communities sooner, rather than just saying there's all this nice clean power but it's going somewhere else. And I think it would be good to demonstrate that there are real material benefits locally, in both in terms of the economic advantages, but also in terms of the clean energy and air.
Thank you very much. Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Thanks, Benedict. Olivia, this is one of the the great challenges that we've got to tackle, and it is obviously, as you say, it is planning, but there are three challenges. There's planning, there's the questions of disruptions to nature, and the question of national security and radar impacts. And where does the pressure point lie, and who has to give is a really important question. I think the challenge is, can we find ways to mitigate and support all three of those, if you like, competing pressures on offshore wind? And there's a huge amount of work, and I've just pulled together an interministerial group so that we can look at this in a genuinely whole of government way, because I think, exactly as you say, we have to find ways through it. Some of the challenges which Nicola sets out so well on planning and the onshoring issues are ones that, again, working with communities, we need to find ways to move forwards on. But that longer term question of that offshore transmission system will then hopefully ease some of those pressures in the longer term, because we're thinking, obviously at the moment, 40 gigawatt to 2030, but if you look at the modelling out to 2050, we're talking potentially up to 100 gigawatt of offshore wind. So clearly the idea of onshoring all of those is simply, impossibly straining on those East Coast communities. But the questions of the impacts on nature, which clearly for the Crown Estates is a really important part of the mix, and understanding both the seabed and the bird life impacts. And so we're working very closely with DEFRA and trying to really understand how we can cohere this. And the developers have come a very long way. I mean, when I was working with them when they were looking at onshore wind 10, 15 years ago in Northumberland, for instance, there was far less knowledge, understanding or commitment to working with the relevant specialists to really get to grips with those challenges and understand how the turbine would impact on the different parts of nature. And I think we've made real progress there, and the developers have invested a huge amount of time and effort in that, and DEFRA are leading that piece. And then there is the question of radar disturbance, and there is a big piece of work ongoing, working with developers and the MOD to try and crack that, and that I think is a technological solution which we will look to find. But those three are intertwined and critical to solve, because the quantum that we're looking to make use of in the North Sea will be substantial.
Thank you very much. And at the mention of the MOD, I'm going to turn to our next questioner, who is Admiral Lord West. Admiral.
My question, thank you very much, has been fascinating. My question is for Anne-Marie, and it's slightly niche. The huge area of seabed now that's going to be affected by this, obviously a mass of it has got unexploded ordnance on it. And at the moment, what we do, go ahead and blow it up, and it's causing real damage, we know now from surveys, to sea life, particularly things like dolphins, but also actually to the seabed itself. And the way to get around this is deflagration as a way of disposing of them. And we pushed this about 2 years ago, and I think BEIS did a study. It doesn't seem to have got any further yet. So even to the extent that we've got Joanna Lumley to help us, because as she can get Gurkhas doing anything, we thought that would put pressure on people. But could I ask Anne-Marie, is this going to be moved forward? It is actually, joking aside, quite an important issue.
Anne-Marie, you're quite right. It is an extremely important issue and one that is part of that wider conversation that we're having across government to really tackle those challenges. It doesn't only apply, as you quite rightly point out, about the ordnance that needs clearing, but there are questions about the impact on the sea life in the way that cabling is put in, and there are ways to mitigate the impact through bubbling around cables and that sort of thing, which we need to determine with developers how best to use those technologies to make sure that we reduce those disruptive impacts on the way through. But absolutely the question of knowing, well, in as much as perhaps you can tell us where you dropped off any excess weaponry on your way home, where it might be sitting on the seabed. I'm not sure that it's entirely clearly mapped, which is one of the challenges, of course. But the MOD and BEIS continue to work on that, and that will be part of this cross-Whitehall set of challenges that we want to look to solve and to find mitigations. I mean, we can't solve it as such, but mitigations to reduce the impacts on the wildlife as we move forward with the technology investment.
Thank you.
Might I jump in, Benedict?
Of course, please.
Because this is, it is so interesting, particularly when you receive a letter from Joanna Lumley in your office, and seeing the impact that she has as a campaigner. The reality is that it becomes the responsibility of the developer to deal with any unexploded devices that are largely left over from the Second World War. They're not recent deposits and accidental losses, as I'm sure the Admiral is well aware. And they have got a responsibility to deal with those devices in a responsible way. And they use the most up-to-date and available technologies that are there for them to use. As soon as there is something else that is available and that is effective and can be utilised within the appropriate time frame, then of course industry is really open to that. Those discussions are very live. The amount of detonations that are required are fairly minimal in the grand scheme of the developments, however.
Thank you very much. We're now going to turn to our next questioner, Marshall Hall. Marshall, your name and your organisation, please. Marshall, you there? Okay, we'll come back to you, Marshall, don't worry. I'm going to move to Simon Skillings from E3G.
Good afternoon, everyone. Simon Skillings, working with E3G. As I understand it, virtually all the analysis has shown that overwhelming cost benefits and environmental benefits will come from integrating the UK offshore grid into countries, the grids of countries on the other side of the North Seas. We've got our own report coming out in the next few days, which reinforce this. Now, unfortunately, that will involve a lot of difficult issues to be overcome, issues of who pays and who benefits, issues of governance around planning and cost impacts it has. It seems like something that must be taken forward, and I just wondered what the panel's view was on the priority of tackling these integration issues into the European market.
Anne-Marie, can I turn to you first? I think you may be on mute, Anne-Marie.
I am so sorry, honestly, we never learn, do we? Simon, it's a really, really important point. And I think that's one of the challenges we've got in thinking. We've got two horizons, because we've got our 40 gigawatt by 2030 horizon, but we've also got this much longer, to net zero, and what I would call then, effectively business as usual for the long term, potentially something like 100 gigawatt by 2050. And as you say, part of a much more shared approach to that energy to be used where it is. And that's why we launched the Offshore Transmission Network Review and the work that's going on there to think exactly about how we can deliver increased coordination as quickly as possible. I mean, I think that's really important whilst we maintain that offshore wind growth in that short-term horizon. And I mean, Nicola is the person who speaks to this. National Grid ESO have done a huge amount of work in this space, but to really think about what that solution might look like. The North Seas Energy Cooperation Group, of whom the Belgians have the chairmanship at the moment, is thinking with all those North Seas countries about how it might look. And there's a number of developmental ideas moving forward. And I think, the sooner we can actually get to grips with that, and I think there's huge cooperation and willingness across the other side of the sea, the sooner we can make the investments that we need, which will have that long-term benefit and maximise the use of the offshore wind and energy that we generate.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would actually just challenge a bit that there are lots and lots of barriers. We've already got, and we will have by 2025, about 8 gigawatts of interconnectors to a number of other countries: Norway, Denmark, France, Netherlands, Belgium. It's a long list, and we work really cooperatively with those countries to install the equipment and then to make them work and to use them effectively. What we're seeing is that's a real, very high proportion of the electricity that's transferring over those routes is green electricity, so it's from renewable sources. And I think that will only grow as all of these countries decarbonise. I talked before about the possibility of what we call multi-purpose interconnectors, so connections to other countries which also serve wind farms on the way. And I think that's a real opportunity to minimise the impact on both sides of the Channel and the North Sea in terms of onshore infrastructure, but also making sure that we don't litter the seabed with more and more interconnectors. There are real ways of bringing things forward. So we see them as great because they'll reduce the impact both on coastal communities and the sea. They'll provide reliable energy. They'll have a reduction in the need for further work and therefore cost reduction. And we can do multiple things at once, which seems to me a real opportunity. And I don't think there are that many challenges to doing it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try Marshall Hall one more time. Marshall, are you there? Marshall? No. Okay. Next up is Lord Brewers. Lord Brewers, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Thank you for this very useful presentation. May I ask a few engineering questions about numbers?
If you could keep it to just one, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, that's really inadequate. Let me put my question. I'm assuming the 40 gigawatts is a gross capacity. It seems to be based on 12 megawatts per generator. One or two numbers, just one, please. What is the efficiency you're now assuming so we can realize what net output is generating turbine?
Thank you very much. So, question about the load factors and the output of offshore wind. I think the best person for that is Melanie. Over to you.
I knew you were going to come to me, and I was going to say I'm unashamedly not an engineer. When it comes to efficiency of the turbines, though, they are increasing all the time as technology advances. That is improving, and the use of data monitoring within the turbines is also increasing to make sure that efficiency outages are reduced. the big thing is about wasted energy, and it's about how we then store the energy. And there's a lot more to go in terms of making sure that we've got the right kind of technology in place to make sure that when the wind is blowing and the energy is being generated, it does go somewhere and is stored so that we can use it at a later date. And we're still in the early stages of that at the moment. But with every new iteration, I mean, the turbine blades that are going to be manufactured in Ben's backyard are, each blade's over 100 metres long, 100 metres high, however you're going to be perceiving it. With the kind of 250 metre turbines, they are incredibly substantial, which means that every revolution is only going to be producing more energy, which means that they are going to be much more efficient. And all of the research as well that's going into the placement of the farms, the shape of the farms and the layout of the farms means that that we are reducing the inefficiencies that exist all the time. I can't be specific. I'm very happy to go away and come back to the gentleman who's just asked the question if he would like some more statistics on it.
Thank you very much. Nicola, would you like to add to that?
So you're right that the National Grid Electricity System Operator does a lot of work on this. They think quite hard about what they call derating factors. So they make an assumption about the difference between constant generation and the wind generation. And my recollection, because I haven't looked at this for a while, is that the derating factor is somewhere in the region of 10 to 15% for offshore wind. But it is one of those things, as Melanie was saying, this is a changing picture all of the time. There's lots of work going on. I would point you towards the Electricity System Operator website. They have a lot of information about how they're thinking about that evolution at the moment.
Thank you. We are in our last 10 minutes of today's event, so I'm going to ask one or two more questions and then we'll do some closing remarks from the speakers. So I'm just going to turn to Sam Cheaton-Walsh. Sam, are you there?
Yes, thank you so much, panel. Can everyone hear me? Yeah,
we can.
Seeing nods. Thank you so much. I posted my question in the chat, but I'll just read it. The panel has talked about investor confidence. Denmark and Ireland have shown climate leadership by stopping issuing new licenses for oil and gas, which gives much needed clarity on the direction of travel for industry, spurring on economic and jobs development into decommissioning, offshore wind and clean tech, building new job opportunities for energy workers. Will the UK follow their lead and end licensing before COP26 in this pivotal year for our climate? Thank you very much.
That's a big thorny question to almost finish things off. So over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you. Sam, I think the challenge, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is to be able to maintain the energy security that we require with the oil and gas sector in the short and medium term, whilst we grow our low carbon technologies to pick up and rebalance. We've already gone from 40% coal to 2% coal in 10 years, balanced out by renewables, and that will continue to go. So we've got a licensing review ongoing at the moment, which we hope to make an announcement on in the relatively near future, albeit the way government, if I say in the next few months, that's probably the best I can offer you. But looking at the same time with our North Sea transition deal, which we hope to also publish in recent times ahead, that actually we look at this in a very holistic way, because the key as we grow our renewable and low carbon energy generation is that we must maintain energy security. So it will be a rolling challenge as we move forward. But I think we've demonstrated, and we've been world leading in our shift away from coal, that it's possible to do that when you know you can grow those new renewable technologies.
Thank you. And Ben Houchen, that balance between the established industries of oil and gas with the many jobs associated with it has to be balanced at a local level with the potential for future technologies associated with net zero. So how does an authority like yours approach a balance like that?
Absolutely, and Anne-Marie was right in her opening remarks. It's about a transition. Now, I can't tell you whether the next 12 months is the right time period or whether the next 5 years is the right time period for review of licensing for oil and gas. What I can tell you, though, and I do make this remark to government on a regular basis, is we've got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater and cost jobs, because it is a delicate balance. We need to tackle the climate emergency. We need to be able to decarbonise our economy. But I always say, very tongue-in-cheek, and I always say it slightly, as a slight joke, but it's a very serious matter. Teesside's actually done very well in decarbonising itself over the last 6 years. But it's easy to cut your carbon emissions by 50% when you close a steelworks. And it's a very extreme example, but we've got to be careful not to destroy existing industries, put many hundreds, if not thousands of people out of work in a rush to try and create the technologies of the future. And that's very frustrating for a lot of people. A lot of people want to get there now, they want to get there tomorrow. But I see that it's much more of a Goldilocks syndrome, that there is a difficult balance to be able to be drawn here, that you've got to move at an accelerated rate towards that net zero target of 2050, which actually is not as far away as people think, but do it in a way that doesn't destroy communities. And in particular, if you take oil and gas as a specific, but actually the larger chemical and processing sectors that produce a huge amount of carbon, those industries are based in post-industrial northern areas that have been left behind and haven't seen the investment and have relatively high unemployment to the rest of the country. So you can balance the climate emergency and our need for net zero, but it's got to be balanced against poverty, deprivation, and opportunity for areas that actually need and deserve actually the opportunities that will be built in their area. And what you've got to do, it goes back to, I can't remember who said that in one of their responses, but it's also about buy-in from the communities. And if you go too quickly to destroy industry in the name of net zero, trying to facilitate it, you actually lose confidence from those communities who are going to be the ones that should be grabbing it with both hands and should be driving that net zero economy.
Thank you very much. And Melanie, that skills point is incredibly important. To what extent is it possible to transfer the skills-based workforce from an established industry such as oil and gas and support that transition with the workforce into new industries like wind?
I just wanted to add to Ben's comments, I think, just to remind people that lots of new entrants into renewables are the traditional energy providers. You know, they are transitioning as much as there is a move from oil and gas into renewables. A lot of the drive is coming from companies who have got that experience and so already have a workforce, although they might be developing new areas of their business and reaching into the future of cleaner and greener energy. When it comes to skills, there is a lot of crossover. I don't think that it is fair to say that because you are able to work offshore in oil and gas, that you immediately can go and work on an offshore wind turbine. I think that there does need to be an acknowledgement and an acceptance that they are different disciplines. But by and large, if you are an engineer, you are an engineer. So there is only a small amount of additional training that is needed to convert people into being able to work in a different environment. And I think that there are a lot of similarities. They are both very dangerous occupations. And so they come with a very specific health and safety mindset. So they transfer across very well. I'd say that the renewables sector is very clear, though, about setting itself apart. It does want to do things very differently. It does want to adhere to some higher goals in terms of the perception of the industry and what it's trying to achieve and how it fits in a modern workforce. So it is looking increasingly at diversity. It is looking at its own record in terms of sustainability and its impact on the environment as much as delivering clean energy. And I think that there is a role potentially for something like a Just Transition Fund. So where there are communities, and I'm floating this entirely without any kind of backup, I have to say, just freestyling this and probably will get in trouble, but there is something I think that could be, you know, industry government supported Just Transition Fund that supports any kind of retraining to make sure that the skills that are needed are provided in the areas that need them.
Thank you very much. I'm turning to our very final questioner, and then I'm going to ask our panelists to offer some closing remarks. Duncan van der Wielen. Duncan, name and organisation, please.
Hello, good afternoon. So I studied petroleum geology and computer science at the University of Aberdeen, and I'm quite well aware of the detrimental impacts to individuals that can come with a decline of oil and gas in a city like that. So I'm sorry to ask a political question, but do any of the panelists see the drive for renewables as an opportunity to replenish good faith in the union?
Don't apologise for political questions here, Duncan. That's very welcome. So I'll pass straight to Anne-Marie.
Thank you, Duncan. I think. Well, I would hope that everything that this Conservative government does is absolutely committed to, embedding and really re-energizing where there is any anxiety about the union. I think, if COVID has shown us last year that a, cross UK way of working is the solution to help really reach every citizen, I think in how we think about our energy transition, that is similarly, it's for every citizen and it's for our commitment to our planet. So making sure that we do that in a way that invests in all those communities that can be part of the energy transition is absolutely critical, and is very much there. I think, as looking, the Welsh communities have a great deal of experience in the nuclear sector. Scotland's oil and gas industry clearly is very extensive. The northeast coast of England also in the oil and gas and the chemicals industries, and the transformation that those will bring both into CCUS to support heavy industry and then hopefully the production of hydrogen, generated both in terms of blue hydrogen and then green hydrogen, potentially using some of that offshore wind that will be powering. So absolutely, everybody needs this renewable low carbon energy, and therefore reaching to those communities who will do it are across the United Kingdom, all 4 nations, and we will be absolutely focused on making sure that we invest in every corner.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move to some closing remarks from each of our panelists so that we can hopefully close in the next couple of minutes. If you could keep those remarks relatively short so that we can close close to finishing time. Melanie, can I start with you?
Absolutely, thank you. I think it's been a great discussion actually, and really insightful questions. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. If I can land one thing, I suppose I would say that the report, I took away that it was very clear about the need for infrastructure, and it was very clear about the need for planning. And I would say that the lesson from offshore wind is that yes, those things are incredibly important. However, what we've latterly discovered is the need for some of the softer infrastructure. So planning around a wider strategy to deal with the supply chain so that you can actually deliver those wider community benefits that everybody can feel a part of. I will reiterate that point about cables. I think that there is a huge amount of opportunity when it comes to specialising in this. We know that there is not enough capacity in Europe to deliver the amount of cabling that we will need over the next decade and beyond. And we already have some incredibly skilled and talented UK businesses in that field that we can use as a learning mechanism around the rest of the country.
Thank you. Ben.
Well, my closing remarks are going to be so short. I just want to respond to the guy from Aberdeen, because being from Aberdeen, he'll know Teesside very well, because either he'll have visited it because of the oil and gas connection, or he'll know many of my resident Teessiders who work extensively in Aberdeen. And I think absolutely there is a symbiosis there of what we are doing in Teesside can absolutely take place in Aberdeen. And I would finally say on that point, it's nice to see, albeit having panned it for many, many months, if not years now, the SNP are all of a sudden converts to the idea of free ports, which absolutely I'm sure Aberdeen are probably bidding for as part of the devolved nation, which will supercharge the rebirth of Aberdeen into a renewable centre away from oil and gas. My closing remark is that the government just needs to keep its foot flat on the accelerator in the way that it has. And just to re-emphasise the point that, I've been in this job now for 4 years. I've championed renewables in all different ways. I have not seen a commitment from the government as we have under this Prime Minister. We're really actually grabbing people by the collar, forcing manufacturers to come to the UK and forcing the idea that industry does need to decarbonise. And I just hope that they continue as they've started.
Thank you. Nicola.
Yes, well, we're going to echo one another just as we did at the beginning, I think. Anne-Marie's been talking a lot about whole of government solutions, and I think it's whole of government and industry solutions. I completely agree with her. I think we've all got to work together. And I agree with Ben on the need for speed. We need to move from planning into delivery. Particularly, we're going to hit the 2030 goals and keep going to deliver overall. And one point about the bringing us all together, we all need one another for the solutions here. And they do different things. So there are some solutions from Scotland, from onshore wind, bringing electricity down into the UK, into England, that we already do on the West Coast with the Western Link. And we're going to be doing with 2 Eastern Links coming up over the next 10 years. But on the same side, they work both ways. So that provides resilience to the Scots to make sure that we have energy security as well. I'm always thinking about energy security, the decarbonisation of energy, and making sure we do it as the lowest cost possible, and hence the need to keep that speed up. Thank you.
Thank you. And Anne-Marie.
Thank you. It's been such an interesting discussion, and Melanie's given us an issue that we're going to have to go and investigate now. I'm loving that, Melanie. You don't get away easily. I think it's a really, really profoundly important idea. I think, as I've said before, this is a whole of government, but it has to be a just transition. So as part of my role, I'm also the international champion for COP26. And we are world leading in what we're doing, and the challenges we've set ourselves as a country in the demonstration, in the way we've moved away from coal and how we've invested in renewables. But there is a long way to go. 68% by 2030 is challenging but achievable if we take on carbon budget 6 as suggested by the Climate Change Committee, which the Prime Minister will decide upon in the near future. So because we have to embed our choice in legislation this spring, we have to look to decarbonise at 78% by 2035. That is a huge leap, and in doing that, we have to be able to demonstrate. And for me, what's really important is that we build our own really strong low carbon economy so that we can help the rest of the world do the same. Because it's no good if we go net zero by 2050 and all those countries who are just not economically able to make the big investments to help those transitions can't do it. We have to be able to lead both by getting ourselves in the right place and then being able to take our expertise around the world to help those other countries decarbonise, along with setting that standard, which means the other big emitters will do the same. It's a really big challenge. Doing it ourselves does not solve the great global challenge of our time. So there's a huge amount to do, but I would always say, and for those, and I understand absolutely the frustration, why aren't we there yet already? But it is a transition and it's a journey to 2050. And if we can achieve that, we will, as a planet, have done something genuinely extraordinary. I think we, both as the UK and indeed with our European partners on that other coast of the North Sea, are absolutely, it's incumbent on us to get it right and to demonstrate what can be done in a collaborative way, because that's the only way that as a planet we will get anywhere like keeping to the 1.5 degrees to stop our biodiversity and the risks to so many communities being impacted permanently by the climate shocks that are coming, even if we fix it by 2050 and we get to net zero across the planet. Those climate shocks are still coming because we've put too much carbon dioxide into the air. So we have to work absolutely holistically. It's electricity generation, it's the behavioural change that all of us have to make, but we have to do it in a way that is a just transition that helps us to grow our economy and to move into a new way of living, which is more sustainable and which has low carbon energy at its heart. It's a really exciting journey, but it will take all of us to throw all our energies in all at once. But I think certainly today on this panel, Benedict, we have absolutely 100% commitment from everyone, which is really, really exciting. And I think engendering that enthusiasm across the country is our great challenge now.
Thank you very much. A rousing end to a fascinating discussion. So it just leaves it to me to thank you very much, all of our panelists. We're really honoured to have such distinguished people contributing to Policy Exchange's work like this. Thank you to all of our questioners, and thank you to those of you who tuned in. This video will be available immediately online, and we look forward to hosting many more events over the rest of the year leading up to COP26. Thank you very much.